And good Saturday morning. We appreciate you spending some time with us. And we're going to spend a very special 45 minutes or an hour or so this morning talking about dementia with Dr. Kalpana DePasquale. She is with St. Augustine Ear, Nose, and Throat and a longtime member of our team here at WSOS Radio. I think we're going to have a good morning talking about a topic that impacts a lot of individuals and a lot of families, right, Dr. DePasquale?
It certainly does.
Let's start out with the very basics. We throw around that term dementia. We talk about Alzheimer's. We say that somebody has, that they're just becoming forgetful, what have you. Let's back up a little bit. What is the definition of dementia?
So that's a good place to start because people often confuse dementia with so many other things. So dementia is really defined as a chronic disorder of the mental processes caused by brain disease or injury. And a lot of times these people will have memory disorders, personality changes, and impaired reasoning.
Yeah, and we hear of it too as, hey, somebody is becoming senile. Is that synonymous with dementia?
No, it's not. Actually, senile dementia can be a diagnosis, but people think that any kind of mental decline is a normal part of aging.
And is that true? Let's back up to that because a lot of us say, oh, well, I have Aunt so-and-so and she's 93 years old and she's just as sharp as a tack. And we almost view that person as the exception rather than the rule, right?
I think that's very, very true in today's society.
So is it a natural part of growing older that we would become more forgetful?
So forgetful, I think there's a component of that is very, very true. As people get older, they may forget some little things, maybe lose their train of thought. But becoming severely impaired is a whole different beast and a whole different animal altogether.
Once again, if you're just joining us, that's Dr. Kalpana DePasquale, and she is, of course, the founder and clinical director at St. Augustine Ear, Nose, and Throat with 2 locations here in St. Johns County. One, of course, in the Ponte Vedra area on US 1 North near Nice High School, and also located over on the island just over the 312 bridge. You can learn more by going to saent.net. That's saent.net. And this Saturday morning, we're talking about dementia, which is, let's be honest, kind of a scary topic. Is there any indication that you can get early warning signs of dementia?
Well, a lot of people, it just starts with some memory loss and forgetfulness, and then they may start to display some personality changes and mood changes. So I think we need to be aware of these symptoms just so we know when it's time to maybe encourage a family member to probably go to the doctor and get something checked out.
Once again, that's Dr. Kalpana DePasquale. We're talking about dementia, which I guess from what we talked about earlier, at least off the air, this is not a specific disease. In other words, you don't necessarily get dementia, right?
Right. I mean, it's just a term that can really describe a wide variety of symptoms, like we said before, a decline in memory, decline in thinking skills, it has to be enough to decline their basic daily activities of living. That's where the differentiation is.
One of the types of dementia, of course, is Alzheimer's disease, and that's probably one of the most frightening diagnoses that anyone listening to us could receive. And yet, I guess 60 to 80% of all people who have these symptoms of dementia are actual Alzheimer's patients, if you will. What's your sense of Alzheimer's?
So, I mean, surprisingly, Alzheimer's is 5 million patients that have been diagnosed in the United States. I mean, I think that's just a large number. And Alzheimer's, as we know, is just probably one of the more common types of dementia that there is out there. And most of these people will just kind of have some confusion about what day it is or where they are, maybe even have some trouble speaking or writing. They may lose things. They may show poor judgment and also mood and personality changes. So those are basically the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease that we can usually pinpoint.
And it seems just from, speaking with various people that we encounter day in and day out here in St. Johns County and St. Augustine, that the pace of Alzheimer's disease, the way it impacts people, can be very different from person to person.
Oh, absolutely. I've seen it in some cases where it's been very slow and, people don't deteriorate that quickly. And then other times it's just a very rapid progressing kind of disease.
As a medical doctor, Dr. DePasquale, can you spot someone with Alzheimer's in the early stages?
I mean, I think we see some common changes, especially in my field. I mean, I have seen some patients for, a good 13 years. So I can definitely tell that there's been some decline in their cognition. I can tell that their memory is just not the same and that they seem different. So you can usually spot these things. And oftentimes, if I even have a concern, I will just recommend that they see a neurologist and point out the things that I'm seeing that I'm concerned about.
That's Dr. Kalpana DePasquale, and she lives with us right here in St. Johns County. She, of course, is the founder of St. Augustine Ear, Nose, and Throat. And on this Saturday morning, we're talking about dementia and all of its various symptoms and what it means for folks. It's a very frightening state of affairs for a lot of different people. Do you find that dementia exists in certain families more so than in other families? Is it genetic at all?
No, as far as I've researched and as far as I've seen, the bottom line is that most dementia is really just sporadic, not familial. And there is a small percentage of dementia that can be genetic, but it's a really, really small percentage in comparison to the others.
Some of the things that people may think that, gosh, maybe I'm showing signs of dementia. I forget my keys, or I can't seem to remember people's names at parties. Are those really early warning signs of something to be worried about, or is that just the kind of way we live these days? We have so much on our minds, we become forgetful.
I think that if it's something that happens every so often, it's probably not anything to be concerned about. But when these things are happening on a regular basis, I think that's when you need to get something checked out. Because God knows I forget people's names at parties and things like that all the time. And I'm sure I don't have dementia.
Right. Is there a way, I guess, to be tested for it? And what do you recommend? Should people get in touch with an ear, nose, and throat specialist like yourself, a neurologist? Do they go to their family doctor? I mean, if they really believe that they are increasingly more forgetful, they're having trouble keeping track of things, much more so in a significant way, what should they do?
Really the best place to start is your family doctor, just because they're the ones that know you the best. They're the ones who have seen you through, many, many years and can see that something has definitely changed. From there, they may wind up referring you to a neurologist. The interesting thing about dementia is that there's not just one test to diagnose any specific type of dementia. There is a battery of tests that need to be performed to really come to an accurate diagnosis.
Once again, it's Dr. Kalpana DePasquale with St. Augustine Ear, Nose, and Throat. You can reach her best by just going to the website, saent.net. That's saent.net. And on this Saturday morning, we're taking some time out from the music. We're talking about dementia, and we'll be right back. And we're back on this Saturday morning with Dr. Kalpana DePasquale from St. Augustine Ear, Nose, and Throat. She's a longtime part of our family here at WSOS. And we're taking a break from the music to talk about a very important topic, and that's dementia. And there's very few people out there listening who have not experienced it in some shape or form, at least encountering with neighbors, friends, family members. And probably universally, Dr. DePasquale, it is frightening for people.
It is very frightening, especially, I think, when you're watching your loved one go through something like this. It's very concerning. And people, I think, feel kind of helpless. They're not sure what to do, where to take them, how to get it evaluated.
For those of us, listening to you this morning who may have had a grandparent that would have gone through dementia and had all these issues maybe 20, 30 years ago, are we doing a better job? Has science advanced at all to help us treat those people who have these various symptoms of dementia today as opposed to what it was like 20, 30 years ago?
I mean, as always, medicine is constantly making advances. I think that our diagnoses is better, and I think that people generally in the general population are more aware of the symptoms, so probably they would act sooner upon it. So definitely, there are definitely breakthroughs constantly being made, but we don't have a cure. That's that's definitely a different issue.
Right. We talked in the last break, if you're just joining us, Dr. DePasquale kind of walked us through talking about Alzheimer's disease. There's other aspects of dementia, I guess would be the right way to phrase it. Vascular dementia. What is that?
So vascular dementia is a type of dementia that occurs after a stroke, and this is actually second, right after Alzheimer's, as being the most common dementia type. And the interesting thing is that with Alzheimer's, people usually have memory problems, and with vascular dementia, it usually starts with poor judgment and trouble planning. So those are the differences between the two.
Okay. There's something called dementia with Lewy bodies, or DLB. What is that?
So that's where, Lewy bodies are microscopic bits of protein that form in some people's brains, and they're actually named after the doctor the scientist who discovered them. And it's called Lewy body dementia, where they find these deposits that form in a part of the brain and collect.
Not sure I'd ever want something named after me that related to dementia.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
We have to find something really cool that we can name, Kalpana DePasquale.
Yeah, I think that's a long name for anything.
Like some sort of like the equivalent of the Fountain of Youth or something like that, right?
That'd be all right. It's better than dementia.
A good thing. Let's talk a little bit, too, about how the symptoms of dementia can vary greatly. Maybe some people may have a loss of memory. Maybe somebody else may have difficulty keeping up with things. Perhaps maybe somebody else has a real personality change. That seems to be the one thing that really scares folks that we see with advanced Alzheimer's patients, is how they can become, a little bit mean, right?
Exactly. And it's just not the way that they were before.
Right.
And I think it's hard to remember that this is just the disease, not the real person at hand. And it's a tough one.
Right. Some things that come about when people are dealing with dementia that we may not readily think about: problems with movement, trembling, slowness, dreams where you act out physically. Maybe you have more wild dreams than you might have had 10 or 15 years ago. All these sorts of things, right? Do they happen typically all together, or will certain patients have certain things?
I feel that patients will really have a myriad of symptoms and not all of the symptoms that we talk about. Some people even have visual hallucinations and some blanking out and staring episodes throughout the day, sleepiness. So it's just, these things can be so vague, it's hard to even realize that somebody may be suffering from some early stages of dementia.
Once again, that's Dr. Kalpana DePasquale, and she is with us here this morning on Saturday, and we're talking about dementia, a topic that impacts so many families here in St. Johns County and St. Augustine, and that's why we're spending some special time today discussing this issue. If you have any questions for Dr. DePasquale, you can always communicate with her through her website at saent.net. Obviously, that stands for St. Augustine Ear, Nose, and Throat, but saent.net. You can also send messages to us through Facebook at WSOS Radio, and we'll make sure to send those emails and messages along to Dr. DePasquale. Let's talk about short-term memory just a little bit, Dr. DePasquale, before we go to another break. Oftentimes, maybe, is it a sign of something to be troubled about if someone can, remember what happened at Disney 15 years ago, but can't seem to remember what kind of cereal they had this morning?
Absolutely. I mean, that can definitely be an early sign of dementia. And it's tough because they forget things that kind of are important that happened in the recent past. So it's a little bit scary.
Right. Changes in mood. This is kind of a difficult topic because obviously seniors have reasons to perhaps become depressed, the loss of a spouse, or just loneliness, or no longer being engaged in the workforce, or what have you. Losing a friend can cause depression, but in and of itself, depression can be a sign of dementia as well, right?
Yes, it certainly can. And again, this is one of the early signs that we'll typically see. But, I think depression, in addition to a shift in personality, would really leave some cause for concern.
Well, once again, if you know someone, there's a friend, a family member, somebody that's close to you that has some of these issues that we're talking about this morning, we would encourage them to go and see their family physician, right?
Correct. Absolutely.
And if you have any additional questions about it, we hope that you'll reach out to Dr. Kalpana DePasquale and her team at St. Augustine Ear, Nose, and Throat. They'll be happy to point you in the right direction. Just go to the website, saent.net. That's saent.net, and we'll be right back. And we're back with Dr. Kalpana DePasquale on this Saturday morning, and we're taking a break from the music for just a few minutes to talk about an issue that impacts so many families and individuals here in St. Augustine and St. Johns County, and that's dementia and the various aspects of it. We've talked about Alzheimer's, we've talked about memory loss, short-term issues with memory, all those sorts of things. One of the other issues, or a common symptom of early dementia, apparently is apathy. Should we care about apathy? I couldn't resist that.
No, we don't care at all about apathy. Not at all.
I don't care at all about that.
But it's important to know that apathy is actually one of the signs of early dementia. So in these situations, we may have an elderly loved one that all of a sudden love to, do music or dance or, do paint or something like that, or garden, whatever the case may be. And all of a sudden they just don't want to get out and do those things anymore. And that should be a cause for concern.
So, Dr. DePasquale, do you find that that's something that happens fairly quickly? Like someone has I have a neighbor actually in World Golf who's very into making birdhouses, and then he sort of has checked out of doing that. I mean, would that be an early sign of concern?
I mean, I would say maybe he replaced it with another interest.
Right.
That's a possibility, Sometimes
the issue
people...
is whether or not he has replaced it with something, or he's just sort of checked out.
Exactly. I would
All
say
right.
if he's checked out and not doing something else, and, I think it's not abnormal really to change hobbies or, take a break. I know I've done that with the piano at times where I'm just like, I can't do this right now. I
Right.
checked out for a couple of weeks, but then I get back to it.
And then Dr. DePasquale decides to pick up the cello and master that in a matter of 2.5 weeks.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
So here's another, because I think these are good for people to appreciate, and that's the early warning signs of dementia. That's what we're sort of talking about here this morning. One of them could also be that these normal tasks that somebody might do, say, your elderly parent or grandparent normally, has no trouble balancing the checkbook or playing a game of Scrabble or something like that. But then they start struggling with it and getting frustrated by it. That might be a troubling sign, correct?
Absolutely. Now, I'll be honest, I don't balance the checkbook, so that wouldn't be a sign of dementia for me.
So you'd be angry anyway.
So it depends. I mean, if that was something that your loved one was doing all the time and was something that they were good at and did very, very easily, and all of a sudden they are doing it with much difficulty, that's something to be concerned about.
So it seems like overall, if things just go wildly out of the norm,
exactly,
that's the early warning sign. In other words, if they are just really forgetting things, and a lot of things, they're forgetting, starting to forget names, or having trouble doing the normal sort of activities of daily living, and you can just sense that it's something that's happening rather sudden, right?
Exactly. Because they're just personality traits in all of us, but we
Right.
know that that's just the way we are, and this is, somebody may be really good at something and other people aren't, but if your relative that was really great at gardening is all of a sudden letting all their plants die, that might be cause for concern. Now, in my case, I let all my plants die anyway, so it'd be normal for me.
Yeah, I do not have a green thumb.
No, not at all.
Another indication maybe of dementia or the need to go and see your family doctor if a loved one may have some of these early signs would be following a storyline. Television can be a little more complicated than maybe it was 30 years ago, and if you have trouble following a plot line, right?
Absolutely. And sometimes, believe it or not, some of these signs can also be seen when people have difficulty hearing. Surprisingly, some of these symptoms, as I'm, going through this in my mind, I've seen a lot of patients that have seemed depressed or had difficulty following storylines or conversation, and a lot of times it was just hearing loss. And as soon as they could hear, everything changed. We
work closely with the folks at First Coast Hearing, and they say that a lot of families who thought maybe their parents or grandparents were dealing with early stages of dementia, indeed, once their hearing was corrected, they were able to, it wasn't indeed dementia. It was just hearing loss.
Exactly. And I think that's an important point to make, because I think that if you're suspecting any of these things in your loved one, first thing, maybe just get a hearing test and make sure that's not the problem, because that's easy and simple to do.
A failing sense of direction. Now, that could be attributed to all these smarty pants phones, with GPS on them. We have maps in our cars now, right? But indeed, that may be a sign, too, that we're having some issues.
Yes. I mean, if they usually go to Publix and all of a sudden they have lost their way and they don't know how to get to Publix anymore, that could be a problem.
If you have a loved one who is repetitive, repeats themselves over and over again, we do that here on the radio all the time. But apparently, if you do it in regular life, that may be a sign of, of concern, right?
Exactly. And, I know we all have relatives that like to tell stories over and over and over again. Now, that necessarily isn't a sign of dementia. I think they like telling the same stories over and over again. But all of a sudden, if they're just, doing things that they just do once a day, like shave, and then all of a sudden they want to shave again, that would be concerning.
Oh, okay.
Repetitive actions like that, or just even also asking the same questions that you just answered a few minutes ago, that would be worrisome as well.
But telling the same high school football story from 35 years ago may not be a sign of dementia.
May not be.
That's just a personality thing.
Yeah, unfortunately, we just have to sit there and listen to those stories over and over again.
Dr. Kalpana DePasquale is with us on this Saturday morning. We're talking about dementia today. And, of course, you can learn more about her practice and also connect with her by going to the website saent.net. That's saent.net. Another troubling sign, or a potential sign, I guess, of dementia would be struggling to adapt to change. As we get older, at every aspect of every stage of life, we sometimes have to go through some change. Either we change homes, or there's a change in our living situation because someone passes away or a good friend moves away or what have you. But I guess if someone has a really tough time dealing with that kind of change, it's an early warning sign.
It certainly can be, just because some of these people, this little bit of change will throw them off so badly that they just crave this very rigid routine, so they don't have the issues that are caused by the early signs of dementia.
Right. Once again, it's Dr. Kalpana DePasquale, and she is the founder of St. Augustine Ear, Nose, and Throat, with 2 locations here in St. Johns County. One in the north end of the county near Ponte Vedra and Nice High School off of US 1, and also over on the island just over the 312 bridge. You can learn more about both locations and about the practice and her whole team by going to saent.net. That's saent.net. This is a very interesting topic. We're talking about dementia. When we come back, we're going to talk about what causes it. So stay tuned. And we're back with Dr. Kalpana DePasquale. She is the founder of St. Augustine Ear, Nose, and Throat with 2 office locations here in St. Johns County. You can learn more by going to saent.net. That's saent.net. We've been talking about dementia this morning, Alzheimer's, and all these various other issues that cause concern among a lot of families and individuals. We thought we'd kind of go back a little bit, though, and sort of look at the issue of what causes dementia in the first place. What's happening to our brains?
So in dementia, what really happens is that the brain cells really lose the ability to communicate with each other. So that's the fundamental problem. And it's important to remember that the brain has very distinct regions, and each one is responsible for a different function. So like memory is one, judgment, movement. So whenever these brain cells are not communicating properly, that's what causes dementia.
Okay. We can probably learn more by talking to our family doctor about these issues, because I guess we don't want to scare people either. If they see a change in personality, there can be a lot of reasons for that. It can be the loss of friends or, some change in living situation, right? It's not necessarily dementia or Alzheimer's.
Exactly. And that's why I think it's really, really important to start with your family doctor and discuss the symptoms that your loved one is experiencing so they can decide whether further evaluation is necessary.
Right. One point that's been made too, and we've talked about this in the past, is that, what may be dementia, what may not necessarily be Alzheimer's. There could be depression just by itself that's entered into the life of a senior, and that needs to be treated, right?
Absolutely.
With antidepressants or what have you. There could be an issue of other chronic health conditions being treated by medication, and those medications have side effects that kind of look like dementia, right?
Absolutely.
Sometimes because people are depressed or there's a life change later in life, there's an excessive use of alcohol, which is a depressant, right?
Absolutely.
So we have that. There's thyroid problems that can also impact your personality, and vitamin deficiencies as well. So there's all sorts of things other than Alzheimer's. So we don't want to frighten everybody who's listening to us this morning, right?
Absolutely not. We're not here to frighten. We're here to educate.
So is there a test that you can take for dementia? So can I can you scratch my fingernail or something and tell me whether or not I'm going to get dementia?
Unfortunately not.
Oh, come on.
So the problem is that there's not just one test that we can do. It's not like a blood test and we can say, oh, you have dementia or not. It's a lot more complicated than that. So basically, we need to start with a careful medical history, a physical examination, lab tests, and just assess the changes in the thinking and the day-to-day function, and also the behavior associated with each type of dementia that we already discussed.
Well, very interesting stuff. Once again, we're talking about dementia with Dr. Kalpana DePasquale, and you can reach her through the website, saent.net. Of course, she is the founder of St. Augustine Ear, Nose, and Throat, and that's what SAENT stands for, St. Augustine Ear, Nose, and Throat. Check that website out, and you can also connect with her by just messaging us on Facebook. When we come back, we're going to continue speaking with Dr. DePasquale about dementia, so stay tuned. We're back with Dr. Kalpana DePasquale on this Saturday, and we're taking a break from playing the music for a little bit to talk about a very important issue, one that impacts just about everyone in some way. You've all known someone, either a family member or a friend or a neighbor, who has had to deal with dementia, and that's what we're talking about, just trying to get a little better understanding of it today. We've talked about a variety of issues, and before we let Dr. DePasquale go, we wanted to ask about something I think we're all concerned about. Is dementia hereditary? So if my grandmother had it, am I going to get it?
And a very valid concern, absolutely. So there are types of dementia that are hereditary, and that some of them are Huntington's disease and Alzheimer's. But in Alzheimer's, there's only a small portion of those patients who have familial Alzheimer's. So that's important to know. So the majority of dementia is really not genetic. It's about less than 10% that is actually passed down with a family history.
So if indeed we are going to get it, and there's that 10% of us who will, when could we know? I mean, can we know, I guess, just from a genetic test at any age, right?
Well, you can, but, that's a whole other can of worms. I mean, ideally what happens is when patients have the genetic form, they may tend to see symptoms earlier than expected. Where most other people will start to see symptoms or signs much later in the years, these people who have genetic issues will maybe see some changes earlier on in their lifetime.
That's Dr. Kalpana DePasquale, if you're just joining us, and she is a doctor right here in St. Johns County. She's the founder of St. Augustine Ear, Nose, and Throat, And you can learn more by going to saent.net. That's saent.net. If you have a parent or a grandparent, aunt or uncle who had Alzheimer's and perhaps maybe they even passed away from it, should you be tested genetically?
So just because even if you have the familial version of Alzheimer's, even if you have the gene, it doesn't mean that you'll actually express that gene and go on to have Alzheimer's. So, I think there's a lot of controversy surrounding the idea of the genetic testing. So maybe not the topic I want to get into, but, if it's a real concern, I think you should definitely talk to your primary care doctor about it and then go from there. But the interesting thing is just because you have the gene doesn't mean you're definitely going to get it.
It also seems like there's also no clear indication that, say, your grandmother or your mother got Alzheimer's at 65, doesn't mean that even if you carry that gene, that you're going to get it at 65.
Exactly. You may get it maybe earlier,
At
maybe
95.
later, or never get it at all. So,
Right.
I guess that begs to the question of, is genetic testing really necessary? Because just because you have a gene for something doesn't mean you're going to actually express that gene. And in this case, it's extremely true. So if you have the gene, but you are cognitively not impaired and functioning adequately, I don't know. It's a good question to ask.
Do you think, Dr. DePasquale, that over time we will get even better at testing and determining if somebody is a likely candidate for Alzheimer's?
I'm sure they will. Over the years, medicine has made such great advances. It wouldn't surprise me if we come up with better testing over the next 15 to 20 years. But right now, it seems like the genetic testing is a big process and not very many places do it. So I think that's the hard part. It's not like you can just walk into any lab and just get it done.
Before we let you go, I've heard somebody in the past say that if you were to live to be 110, you would inevitably get dementia. That it is inevitable that it's, at least the longer you live, the more likely you're going to get some form of it.
And I think the longer you live, the more likely you are to get probably everything.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just the bottom line. And it's interesting that I read somewhere recently that Robin Williams was suffering from dementia, and that was maybe, some depression associated with that maybe led to his suicide. So that I thought was interesting because you're not two things that you necessarily put together.
Wow. Interesting stuff. Well, once again, very interesting topic on this Saturday morning. We've been talking about dementia. And of course, there's a lot more that can be said about it. If you have any questions at all, especially as it relates to your individual situation, Dr. DePasquale, I think you would encourage them to
at least get in touch with their family care doctor, discuss the issues at hand, and then seek other consultations with the neurologist if necessary.
There you go. If you have any questions at all for Dr. DePasquale at any point in time, we would encourage you to reach her through her website at saent.net. That's saent.net. And, of course, that stands for St. Augustine Ear, Nose, and Throat. And, of course, they have two locations here in St. Johns County, over on the island, over the 312 bridge, and also in the Ponte Vedra area north of town near Nocatee. And you can learn about both of those locations and access them through the website, saent.net. Dr. Kalpana DePasquale, thank you for being with us on this Saturday.
Thank you, Kevin.